Yeah, rock and roll, baby.
Yeah. Woo! Fire.
Right? I'm going to do flamenco next week.
All right. Versatility.
There can't get his act together and get his bass on.
Good.
Rock and roll.
Awesome.
All right. Welcome.
It's so good to be here.
Who's going to kick this thing off?
Highlight of my week.
This is not my idea. I think this is, Rick, your idea, right, dude?
What, platforms?
Yeah, one of your buddies. And I think, Rob, you had a rather dangerous drink with him.
Yeah, I did. Yeah. Pretty crazy, huh? Living on the edge.
Pick it up.
That's life in the autonomous zone. Yeah. So, yeah, I mean, Adam proposed the topic, which I thought was a good one. He started off with like, I think it grew from how dominant will the cloud vendors be in IoT platforms. And it kind of started a bunch of interesting threads of discussion about what all the different parts of the platform world are. I think we all had an interesting set of opinions as well.
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
So props to Adam. Thanks for suggesting the topic.
So how should we attack it, for the sake of the community that consumes this? Because we all agree that words have meaning. What's a platform, right? It's something that you stand something on. You should be able to build on a platform. But in the context of IoT platforms, is a lot of components. Like I said on our thread, there is a connectivity platform, which includes connectivity hardware and, system on chips, something to make the connectivity happen. But then the hardware, there's a sensor, and that's another platform. Then Marc's got to build a UI for it. Someone's got to build the analytics behind it. Yeah. And sometimes I think that talking to a developer or someone in that ecosystem, they immediately get it. That is the sum of all parts, 1 + 1 = 5. But then there's a lot of noise to the customer side where it's like IoT is the product, when it's like, no, it's a feature. It's, it'll do one thing. So that could be a good thread of, again, what it is, what it isn't, and when to stop talking and just talk about what business outcome does this do, what problem does it solve, and then worry about the technology later.
Right.
Go ahead, Rob.
A long time ago, I did this tweet storm, which then I turned the tweet storm into a session that I delivered literally through Twitter, which was bizarre. But it was kind of, to your point, walking those steps, from the machine, the machine with sensors and actuators and a microcontroller and compute and storage and networking, and leaving that. And then the software that's sitting on that thing, right? That's pulling that all together. It needs to bind together maybe the values from those sensors and put them together into something you could serialize and send over wired or wireless networks, right? And then kind of traveling along. And of course, before you send it, you're going to you might have you got to pass along your identity and maybe some kind of credentials. It could be a token, it could be a certificate, it could be whatever. And then you kind of go flying over some kind of network, right? Whatever it happens to be. It could be UDP or TCP, and the data format could be JSON or Avro or XML or CSV or a million other things. And then you come flying. You may, if you're out and about, you might go flying directly into some big IoT platform, middleware thingy, listener, whatever you want to call it, a website, REST services, maybe, you never know. But it might not. A lot of people, I remember like in the early days, and I say early days loosely, early days of this craze of IoT, not the stuff I did a long time ago. But at Microsoft, we had this SaaS IoT platform called Intelligent System Service that was part of the embedded team, and then it kind of got migrated and into Azure, and a whole new thing was built. But early days, there was this thinking, because a lot of people didn't have any background in that world, that the whole universe of IoT would be trillions of IPv6 devices connected to the cloud. And it took a while for folks to go, oh, wait a second. If it's inside a building or a factory or something like that, they're probably not going to do that. They might go through this other thingy. I don't know what to call it. It's a field gateway. Is that the edge? Is that a foggy thing? What the heck is that thing? And it's like, you'd explain it to people like, well, it's like a Cisco router that you have at your company, right? To get out onto the internet. Everybody who's inside doing their email and everything, they use this to get out. And I think of it that way, assuming it's going to go out. I think a lot of people kept assuming it would go out. They didn't realize there are some places. But a lot of people in the IoT space, when they really say platform, they're thinking of this big honking middleware thing that's collecting data in a big way and organizing it, storing it, authenticating, and then applying analytics to it and all that good stuff. I'll let other people ramble on.
Well, what's always torqued me about, like, every time you see one of these platform shootouts or platform quadrants, it's like dogs, oranges, bricks, and bulldozers. They're completely different things, right? That they're showing up on the same matrix. And I used to, my simplistic view of it was that you had the connectivity folks, you had connectivity platforms for a while, right? You had the Actility, Jasper, Enphase. I would argue some of the gateway vendors kind of had their own connectivity platform, but device management, device updates, blocking, tackling. To your point, the next tier up was that mass ingest, massive managing 10 million connection endpoints for always on, that's not a trivial thing either. So, the cloud vendors got really good at doing that stuff at scale, routing it into some data store. But my spin, because obviously I have my biases from ThingWorx days, was then there was the application platform. That's where you build the user experience, integrate it with other line of business applications and processes. But that's like the specific app part. And then you had, now I think there's a growing class of analytic platforms, right? Some general purpose, some very IoT focused, some hyper vertical. But like and then most recently, now we're starting to see the edge platforms, right? Oh, wow, there's a lot of really useful stuff we can do down there. Let's not have that be totally like Wild West. Is there a way to have kind of managed, stuff at the edge? So those are the tiers that I've typically used. Love to hear your guys' thoughts on, if there's pieces missing there.
So it's funny you said Enphase, and I'm thinking of a lot of folks from San Diego, and Enphase, Verizon, we acquired that many years ago. It's called ThinkSpace now. It has a heck of a lot more features than it did back then. But at the core, you need this orchestration, authentication, security platform for the gazillions of devices that are out there. That managed connectivity. I joke that sounds like, oh, connectivity is a commodity. I'm like, okay, let me see you working without the connectivity. All of a sudden, it's like, okay. But then, Rick, now you mentioned the edge platforms, and and again, once again, how do we define that? Because we might argue. So the edge is a physical location, okay? But then the edge could
be locations.
Locations, yes, because it's distributed. Yes, so but it's physical. It exists somewhere.
Yep.
But then going from bottom to top or top to bottom is I'm a manufacturer. I have a extrusion machine here, and if I sensorize it, is that my edge? If I'm the comms, is it the edge of my network, meaning right next to the radio access network? If I'm the gateway vendor, is that physical location where my gateway fits the edge? Then we leave the factory. Now we go to a macro data center somewhere in the city. or, a big data center, out somewhere else.
5G tower in the future, right? Or 5G cell in the future?
Yeah. You have, so I know with Marc, we were talking about, that MEC, that, mobile edge compute attached to a private LTE or private 5G deployment. You've got, hey, let's argue with what's Amazon's product that they drop ship that trailer with all the compute? It's not Outpost.
Ice or snow or something.
I think it's snow or Outpost. Well, same principle, right? So where sometimes we, so if we know that, it has locations and it's distributed, I think what it does is quite simple. It computes, it's thinking, it's helping you make a decision, and it's capable of storing data. And where I think most of the value, especially in industrial IoT, is that if I'm able to localize decisions, it's not only a latency game, but it's a cost. If I can partition, 40% of the decisions and process them locally, I'm doing this because it's like, I've got a gateway here. It's round, it's weird. But I didn't have to do a round trip to the cloud with whatever OT overhead, because I had to go through 17 firewalls by the time. So it's a cost benefit. It achieves latency. And I spend a lot of time talking to good folks that we know, plug twin thread of how does it work if I can have that application in some sort of container or K8s right there next to the factory in which I'm trying to extract value. And as a software, as a software company, as an IoT company, what do you guys see as developers of that value of that local instance? And there's so much fun stuff going in there. And anyway, I've had too much coffee before joining this call.
Actually, that depends on the use case, right? So this is valid for a specific vertical, no, for a specific use case. So from my point of view on IoT platform, actually, and this is how I make it born, was several layers. Now, was one the device layer, no, where you should do all the device management thing, how to provision multiple devices in a really simple way, how to manage the firmware of these devices or the operating system. That's really important. And that's just an IoT platform itself. How to make sense, so how to collect the data and make sense of this data. Then the next layer is visualization. And the other layer that was actually Rick mentioning, it's related with the how to compute or apply business logics on the top of the data. Now, most of the time, this raw data, sometimes it's valuable, but sometimes, a lot of customers needs to apply a lot of business logic. So a lot of algorithms don't need to be artificial intelligence but there is this need of this kind of Amazon Lambda feature that it's relevant nowadays for these IoT platforms. So, and for me, the key part, it was not just to make like one platform and the customer just. So at least our goal at the Things IO was to create a platform or a tool that enabled our customers to create a business model on the top of the IoT platform, so that they were able to create applications for third parties in a really easy way with dashboards for third parties and even dashboards for their providers and suppliers, because sometimes the customer of our customer was not the final customer, was just a supplier that had another supplier. So sometimes it was a tricky way. So our main goal actually was to create a tool that enabled companies to make business with IoT.
You brought up
for me, that's an IoT platform actually.
And I the other multiplier effect from that is if you're the person trying to build some specific line of business application, monitoring vineyards for optimal growth or whatever, having a platform and an ecosystem around there of Lego blocks that you could assemble, that's actually the other value amplifier. It's funny that the whole P word platform, I remember Zia Yusuf, who I do from SAP, he's now over at BCG, but he was CEO of a company called Streetlight. It was doing these I don't know if you remember that, in pavement sensors. Parker was the app to help you find an application or a available parking spot. Anyway, my business partner Russ and I went and met with them. Hey, we just created this new IoT platform. Would you be interested? And he kind of chuckled a little bit. He said, "You're not a platform when you say you're a platform. You're a platform when others say you're a platform," right? And it really resonated. Right? The value of an ecosystem and people, to your point, Mark, people building on what you've created. And I think that's true. And that's true at any of these stacks, right? You're already starting to see like edge ecosystems starting to form. Some open source stuff, some kind of commercial stuff. Same thing, at all the other tiers. But so it's a very loaded word, needless to say.
Yeah, and I think the term platform, to your point earlier, Rick, it's typically used to refer to middleware, right? To basically somehow strip out the complexity of connecting things, or maybe even the complexity of building applications across a wide portfolio of things that are out there. But I think the mindset that is helpful is to think of it in terms of reference architecture. And it's one of the things that I mentioned prior in one of the LinkedIn posts, is that that's generally what it is that you have to apply into any given situation to make that tool relevant. Because in all likelihood, you're going to be cobbling together a wide range of technologies to make something happen, either for your vertical. There may be certain things that you're using horizontally, maybe like AWS IoT data platform or analytics platform. But you made a great point, Rick. There are a lot of different layers in a quote unquote platform architecture. And Mark, to your point, the platform should serve as the full life cycle of an IoT solution, right? So it's not just providing the components and capabilities that you need to develop the applications quickly, because that's what's going to deliver value of the platform. But you need to also be able to sustain and maintain that implementation once it's live, and then retire stuff that's basically introducing technical debt into your portfolio. So the way that we need to think about platforms is probably really start off with, let's say, a generic reference architecture, and then start to characterize permutations, right? Relevant permutations by the different layers as well as the different verticals, because they're not going to be the same. And I think that's one of the challenges a lot of the big players have been having, putting out a platform offering, a generic one, because a generic one doesn't mean anything to anybody, right?
Well, if you think about, if you believe as I do that DIY is still the biggest provider, we've discussed that, I think, in a previous session.
Yeah.
So why would you even use a platform, right? It's got to make, be honest with you, most DIY efforts suck at doing things securely and at scale. It's hard. It really is. Those are hard things to do. So part of the pitch that we had, when I was at Microsoft was, that's what we do, right? We build that into, and other vendors are doing the same thing. And then the other companion piece was, do you want us to carry the pager, right? Who do you want to be doing that 7x24x365 support of that infrastructure? If you're focused on building a solution for intelligent fleet tracking or, elder care monitoring, you don't want to be screwing around with that stuff. But it does come down to cost too. That's the other consideration a lot of people run into. You mentioned one other thing, which I'd love to get the group's thought on. So we always use the P word for everything, right? Even up to the application building, AEP, or whatever you want to call them layer, where you're building UXs and rules. And I guess, is that really tooling? Is that like more like an IDE or tooling, or is it a platform? Maybe that was just a semantic point, but we always called it a platform. I do think when you said middleware, I do think there is another layer, which is the tooling to build applications. I'm not sure what to call that. So anyway, I'll leave it at that.
Technology.
All ones and zeros.
Exactly. We're just firing voltages through gates.
That's it.
You know, all this other stuff is conversation. Yeah.
What do you call that then, the orchestration layer, Rick? I mean, that's how I sometimes, but is that a platform?
Yeah, I don't know. And then when you're building UX, is that, you know, what is that all about? You know, I did an entry the other day on LinkedIn about how important I think at that tier, those kind of tools, platforms, whatever you want to call them, need to realize it's a very heterogeneous world, right? You're going to have big co's. There's big co's today that have the combination of an in-house IoT platform they built, 2 or 3 other vendor stuff that they've accumulated. They don't just switch those devices out to another, you know, platform. So at the application tier, I think you almost need to embrace, it might be a blend of many cloud vendors, the pure plays, homegrown. It's you know, it's not, that's just kind of the real world.
Yeah, let's hear for the architects.
Right.
I mean, you have to design these things. I don't think there's any canned solution. Like, you know, there was never a canned solution for an ERP, you know. ERPs, you would have to configure them, then you'd have to extend the baseline functions, and then you have to integrate it with a bunch of old legacy stuff. So we've talked about brownfield a lot. You have to deal with brownfield. And so when you see these nice, shiny IoT platform offerings come to the market, well, how well do those things blend into the rest of the portfolio, especially how do they handle the old stuff? Are you going to end up having to put a video camera on a gauge like you always talk about, Rob? And is that your solution? I mean, is that level of elegance that the thing is going to be able to support, right? Some of those types of applications you don't really think of, you know, when you build platforms with a greenfield perspective.
Well, you also don't need all the layers in the stack, right? If you think about it, some companies simply need the device management layer. For them, it's just as important to keep the devices secure, right? A bunch of home monitoring equipment. In the industrial setting, a lot of times you don't have devices, right? You literally don't need the device management layer. You're connecting to other systems. So that layer goes away. Some where it's just a pure visibility problem, you know, so they're all just sort of building blocks to some extent.
Wasn't it funny when a bunch of IoT newbies went into the factory for the first time in their whole life, and they thought they were actually going to get to connect to the machines?
Exactly.
They're like, no.
Right. Don't
talk to the hand. Talk to the PLC.
Right.
Get away. Yeah, a lot of people just didn't know what they didn't know. Well, that's fine. You know, people are, you know, like, because no doubt about it, the confusion around platforms, if there is started by all those crazy analysts who, you know, started saying, oh, there's 400, there's 500, there's 1,000 IoT platforms out there.
Yeah. And
when they all said that years ago, I knew exactly what they meant. They meant middleware platforms, because a whole lot of people saw the $11 trillion McKinsey report, and they were off to the races, and they said IoT is a Raspberry Pi, and posting, you know, REST calls with JSON. I've built middleware before. I can do this. And they all ran off and did it. And now they're all dying. But I know that's what it was, at least. I'm catching data. I'm going to look at it. I'm going to do something with it. And it was like hundreds of kind of DIY projects, actually,
right,
from people who didn't necessarily know about scale, you know, or they built it inside their own company, and they said it works great on my computer. And then, of course, you know, it melts down when you try to get to any level of scale. And then security, what? You know what I think is really, really cool? Maybe we've already said it. At least 3 people on this call have physically built one or more IoT platforms themselves.
Yeah, true.
Which is pretty crazy, you know.
Stars to show for it.
Yes, yeah. No, but it you know, how often do you have a call where people are inventors of these things? It's pretty fun.
Well, and when we talk about like what the you know, cloud vendors and so on are doing, in a way, it's like the classic maturity curve. All the stuff that we collectively had to not invent, but we had to include into our platforms. is commoditized and done better, quite frankly, around some of these things at scale and security and so on. The other one that's kind of interesting is I call them nano platforms, right? All the work that the cloud vendors and others and ARM and so on are doing for the edge stuff, right? To not edge as in like the application side of edge, but secure OSs, reliable digital identity, all the stuff that, again, was hard and everybody had to do themselves. Maybe platform's not the right word, but the building blocks that we have today versus what we had 10 years ago are just so much richer, I think.
There are these pieces of the puzzle that are helping. Now, another topic that we can talk as well is, you go all with the big three, no? You do everything with the big three, or you just take pieces from different vendors and use all of them for your solution. So, for example, from my point of view, I hate this lock-in strategy of the big three, that you get locked in and you get married forever and ever and impossible to leave, no? Yeah. So because we hate that, and I actually hate that, so we create mechanisms that any customer can leave whenever they need it, our IoT platform, for example. And this is something as well really important for customers.
Don't you think, I gotta think that there's data out there, but maybe it's just not widely shared, what the actual cost is of going with a smaller partner versus, these big platforms aren't free, right? And at scale, they're not. There's an inflection point for a lot of companies where DIY starts to make sense again. I'm not suggesting they do it, but at least on the quick little spreadsheet analysis, at some level, it does start to become cost prohibitive to use some of the cloud platforms.
I do agree.
Anything like that?
But you have to take into account 2 points. First, it's until you get. So it's, let's say there is a milestone. You reach up to 1 million devices connected. I don't know how many installations of more of 1 million of devices connected, but you get into that point where the people developing the IoT platform or taking care of the IoT platform costs more actually than the cloud. Right. No, and there is this. No, probably there is a point. No, where then it makes sense to move to a big player or to do your own IoT platform on a bare metal data center or whatever you want. But until a specific number of devices connected, it makes sense to go to a small player. Or even do it on a do-it-yourself solution. It's actually, let me give you an example. One of the first, not customers, one of the first leads that we had, actually they were a really successful company in Spain. I cannot tell you more, but they had like few thousand devices, I can say, and they were struggling on the IoT on the cloud solution that they built themselves. So actually, they were using co-op, and actually at that time, and that was 2016, we had co-op on production, so they started using our solution. And actually, they started connected some hundreds of devices, and it worked great. But the solution was, guys, we are not going to use your solution, the CTO told us, because we are raising right now few millions of dollars to rebuild our IoT platform. If I say that for less than $1,000 per month, I can solve this solution, I will be kicked out of the company. Right. So actually, last time I met the CEO, they had 3 IoT platforms built, 1 per each product, and probably each one of them exploding at the same time.
I think we all know when a customer says they're going to do it themselves, they'll be back. They'll be back. Eventually. It might be years, but they'll be back.
Well, because
take off, guys.
Later, Rob.
Hey, good seeing you. Have a good discussion.
But and that's why they become siloed. Because let's be honest, I'm a manager of a line of business which I am responsible for. So how do I build something that gives me a business outcome? Honestly, I'm not thinking about Mark, my partner at this other business unit, should he want to leverage this? And that's what happens. And then thinking of the cost. So I'll make a comment that's very specific to the to conversation with a telco. So, we've got, let's just keep it at LTE so we don't have to go back to 3G. But the level of automation that has happened is happening because the more the provisioning, the authentication, the certificates, the more that all these things are automated, the less it costs the telco to maintain these millions of connections that keep on growing. So to ask that question of like, at which point, what costs more than which part, it's a question that then has to be asked at each, piece of the platform, just to see, is this profitable, or am I taking on a lot of debt, to Leonard's point?
There's a thing, I'm going to throw another term out here, sorry, but like a meta platform. And I actually think the concept of it makes a ton of sense in the IoT. And it kind of goes to Marc's point about portability, and also ties in with the reality of that these systems live. Nowadays, these systems, I've worked with medical device manufacturers that have been connecting their stuff from dial-up modems to now, right? So you kind of have this accumulation of platforms over the years, like commercial ones, DIY ones. You acquired a company that had its own platform. So think of the meta platform as the abstraction layer. It goes back to our discussion on APIs and all that stuff. But it lets you interact with those devices and their data in a uniform way, regardless of how that they connected up and how that got there. For larger companies, I think that kind of capability is going to become increasingly important. And it's not clear yet if the cloud vendors are going to actively embrace cloud-to-cloud scenarios, right? Or cloud to private IoT cloud or data center. So there's still an opportunity there. But if, again, one of the progressive cloud vendors really starts productizing that and embracing that cloud-to-cloud scenario, that's a good business opportunity too. Do you see what I'm saying there? That ability to just abstract away all that stuff.
Sounds like more middleware, but I get it.
Yeah, yet another layer of middleware. That's what sucks about it, right? Yet another layer of middleware.
Yeah, and that's what that whole multi-cloud, hybrid cloud thing is all about. And AWS, Azure, all the big cloud players, they're heavily into that. It's probably one of the big trends that we're going to see continuing to evolve around IoT as well. And so, a lot of times when we think of IoT, we think of these macro cases versus some of the smaller, more isolated, controlled ones like smart factories, where you don't necessarily have to communicate large volumes of data outside of the actual facility, right? And, we've heard numerous times from you guys about how when you walk into a smart factory or a plant, you're going to have the plant manager or the IT guy there or the OT guy there sit there and tell you, no, data does not leave the premise. So, I think there's a number of evolving assumptions that we need to factor in as we start to look at the economics of connectivity as it pertains to IoT. But the thing is, it's not all about just connecting things. It's also about the things as well, right? It's not all about just software. It's not all digital. You have to deal with this thing called the thing. And down to the device component level, there's a lot of stuff going on. And so that's why I think you've seen a lot of the newer entrants into IoT, like Google, like AWS, now start to dabble in the hardware side of the equation. So I think when we talk about platform, it's probably a really bad word to use, because even if you're looking at it, causes a lot of confusion, right? I think it's just a sales term at the end of the day. Oh, hey, we have a platform. Or from an analyst perspective, it's just a new category of something that we can now start to rate and rank, right? I think the IoT domain is so complex, has so many layers. You really need to look specifically at applications and then deconstruct that into all the different layers. And then to the great point that everyone's been making, you need to figure out for yourself who are the partners, the vendors that you're going to partner with, and not necessarily ecosystems, because ecosystems is a little bit different, and that's another can of worms that I don't want to open up on this call. But I think that's the mindset that will dispel a lot of confusion around platforms. At least that's the way I view things. I don't know how you guys.
I agree with that. And, I think from a sales and marketing perspective, instead of using the P word, it's like, can we just stick to domain expertise? Because if you advertise domain expertise and you walk into that factory, within 2 minutes, they will know whether you have it or not. Like if Adam was here and he can just go on fluid systems and he's, being able to speak a customer's language for a particular, industrial scenario, then by the time you don't have to say platform. I understand your problem. I've done this before with these 3 other guys, and here's a plan so that we can lift this thing up. And we didn't have to go into platforms and analytics and reference architecture. So maybe that's it. But how do we scrub the web from the platform noise?
Let's take the pledge. No.
All right. Yes. No. We'll have to find a platform with with a crossed out sign. And then thinking of Rick's comment of, again, let's call it this: if we had a piece of middleware that understood every data point from any platform and could abstract it so that on the other side we can do whatever we wanted with it. I have this very specific to manufacturing view of using advanced networking, whatever that means, right, in order to have that platform. And let me explain. Pick traditional manufacturing, the machines are there for 20, 30 years. They have another 15 years, and they're working great. There are no IOs. There was no internet. You're not connecting this thing, right? This is your traditional brownfield. But we know that because these things, you have to maintain them, there are lots of things you can do with a sensor, with an actuator, so that I can give data to maintenance to enhance the performance. And one of the challenges is that if the shiny new solution comes into this environment and you have legacy machines and a legacy network is only for OT, not for IT, things don't work. And I definitely preach that if these factories looked at a way of how do I get network that works in my factory, that I can prioritize applications. So Marc is going to he's doing the analytics for my machine vision for defects. That is the most critical application. All of the resources go to that, and I can control that. And I can manage, the security from the network perspective. Then manufacturers who pull the trigger on advanced infrastructure, which is that bottom layer, can take advantage of all of these things that are coming, and then they can pick and choose. Because solving for legacy connectivity is really, really tough. To Rob's point, you just don't walk in and say, plug this in. It's not how it works. Rant over.
So is that an advanced networking platform?
Well, it's connectivity.
I get it.
It's connectivity platform.
Right. You use the P word a lot.
Yeah. So the other thing, we've talked about edge platforms too. I mean, because that's still evolving, I'd love to see the community. What Marc said is really ringing through my head about portability and not lock-in and things like that. It's a time where we might want the community to demand or speak with their dollars about the importance of portability of workloads at the edge, right? How awesome would it be if you could, and containerization is going to help a lot, right? There's no question, Docker and Kubernetes and so on, but it needs a layer on top of that. How do you have portable workloads? How do you be able to almost have a store of solutions that you can deploy in containers anywhere in your network that kind of work on anybody's infrastructure and know how to talk to each other? A little bit of a pipe dream, but that's standards. We're going to have another call about that. But when we do need to start as an industry demanding a bit more interoperability, I guess is maybe the way I would spin it. We'll cover that in a future call.
Yeah, and I think there's hope because some of these cloud models that are emerging that support and facilitate multi-cloud, those types of tools will start to come down into the edge. In fact, there'll be a necessity. We can talk about that on a separate call, maybe about edge computing and cloud as it pertains to IoT, which should be a really, really exciting topic.
There, we got two right there, edge and standards and interop.
But never. So I don't know. So let me rewind a little bit. So I think that the three, the Google IoT, Amazon IBM IoT, and Azure IoT, it's just a tool made for big engineering software companies to build these IoT solutions for big companies. And I don't think that's what you describe. It's interesting for them because that will then they will need to charge less hours to the customers, and that's not the goal, that for them. So I don't know. I think these big corporations make these. I wouldn't call these Azure IoT and Amazon IoT, etc. IoT platforms. I think these are just pieces that someone else needs to plug in among them. It's incredible if you don't know how much it costs Amazon, just Google AWS calculator. It's impossible to know how much it's going to cost anything. It's impossible. You need a PhD for that. But I think this is actually done for consulting firms to charge over prices to companies, and this is actually what it's as well killing the IoT. We talk about this on the last episode on IoT business models. This is because it's hard to see the return of investment when these companies are just trying to get as much money as you. So something that what you mentioned makes a lot of sense, but this is not what I think. It's what the big consulting firms are really interested on putting on the table.
Here's a question: like if you think that it's been mostly big expensive stuff and dumb little stuff that's been connected, which sort of is the case, right? A lot of consumery stuff and then big expensive assets. If the long tail or the medium tail is this kind of the next tier of products and things that get connected. The reason I think portability may be important, to your point about the cost of using a third-party platform, if there's some discontinuity and a new player or one of the cloud vendors comes up with something that's half the cost, that's substantial, right? If you've got 100,000 or 1 million or 10 million vehicles or 20 million washing machines connected, that's a big savings in low-margin businesses. So the question is, right now, portability, it's up to the integrator or the consultant or the customer to make all that work. So yeah, we'll cover that in future. But that's really where I was coming from. Is more that how do you take advantage of cost innovations without having to rewrite the whole app? I don't know the answer.
I agree with that, Rick. And another almost a portability use case is back to industry. There's a lot of obsolescence. And again, you put things that I'm going to let die before I replace. And it would be great if I had at least the portability of that data, of that information from that asset, so that when I have to replace it, I've got some continuity of data that might be important. But today, that just doesn't exist. If I have an old SCADA system that was built for me 15 years ago for an integrator that, went out of business 8 years ago. I'm looking for parts on eBay and waiting for this thing to die. So, I think.
But that's called firmware, right? If you upgrade the firmware over the air, you can do whatever you want with that machine. But you have to have that possibility, to upgrade the firmware over the air. So let me give you an example of locking on telcos. Sorry that I got into telcos, but
it's all good. I don't own it.
Hey guys, it's that time. Look at that.
Hey!
Some water.
All right. Well, we have 2 topics dialed up, queued up now for sure.
And special thanks to Adam for suggesting this topic. I think it's a really good one. And so, Rick, you're gonna make the no platform. Well,
and I'm gonna work on my baseline. So
you definitely do that. I think you need a lot of help from our buddy over there.
Yeah. I like it.
What is that, Mark?
I broke this red button in case that we need to censor something.
Yeah. No, you have to whip out that LoRaWAN antenna with the.
No, but this is like a new sound.
You better.
But, we should have something. Everyone should have one of these, and click if we need to censor something.
You better have that ready when we do the standard session.
Exactly.